So I went ahead and applied the normal map to my dumpster. Just a quick review. If you don't see your normal map in your view, there's a couple things you have to make sure. One, you have to make sure that you go to your settings and preferences plugin manager and that metal ray is checked on. So Maya to MR is loaded and auto-loaded. And next thing is, when you go to render this, you want to make sure that this option is checked on. A lot of times you can hit 4 or 5 on the keyboard or even 6 and it still won't check this option on. So the next thing I want you guys to know is this, or take a look at this. These look exactly the same inside of Maya when I applied the normal map to them. But what oftentimes happens when you're going back and forth through ZBrush is it'll actually invert the faces on one of your models. So I'm going to show you how to fix that really quick. You can see here that this model on the left looks perfectly fine. And I'll show you how to remove that seam in your render. It's an option. It's one of the options. But if I zoom in here, let me go to production quality here. And actually under options, I'll show you this really quick. A couple things you want to make sure that you turn on is Maya derivatives. So with Maya derivatives, it'll actually clean up any sort of weird seams. So Maya derivatives under options, and then quality. Let's just let's make sure that we it's under Here we go. Let's just go ahead and do HD 720. Alright, and I'm going to hit render at this point so you can get a little bit bigger of a window. You can see it greatly cleaned up that seam too. So by using my derivatives, it cleans up any of the weird inverting in the faces. Now another thing you want to check is if you still have those, if it still inverts on you depending on when you shift your render, see how I got rid of that seam? You want to make sure that all of your faces are facing the right way. Kind of like this. You want to invert these faces. So you can just go to face normals, reverse normals, and render that out. And that's another way of cleaning it if your faces are inverted. Alright. Let's go ahead and take a look at texturing our dumpster at this point. So we got a really nice normal map. Again, we haven't really did any real normal mapping or any high-res to any of the other parts of the model, but I'm going to go ahead and fire up Photoshop. And let's go ahead and start taking a look at how to create our diffuse. So the first thing I start off with is I start off with the actual normal map file itself. Okay? And I hit Control-Shift-U and that desaturates it. And then what I do is I hit Control-L, and what I'm looking to do is really push the lights and darks in areas like this. For example, where the rust is starting to wither at the bottom, things like that. So it gives me a nice base to work off of. Okay? And then let me go ahead and open up my layers. I drag my desaturated normal map on top, and at the bottom I select a color. So say I want my dumpster to be an off blue, and I fill it. And then here I just multiply this. So I get my base color, and I just save this off as a diffuse for now. So dumpster diffuse. Or you can do color, depending on what your art director or your instructor wants you to use. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and jump back into Maya. Material attributes. Open up a file here. And open up my dumpster color. Now, by desaturating the normal, you can see that it really pushes in that shadow information. You can see that's here. And if you actually go in here and you turn off the normal map, so I'm going to go material attributes here. And actually, we can just, this would be a good example of how to show you some of the stuff in the hypershade. You can right click on this and then graph network. So it'll actually expand your hypershade at the bottom. So say you want to go ahead and delete, and I'm going to hit F to focus on this. I want to go ahead and get rid of this normal map. I can just select those 3 nodes and delete them. Now when I render this, let's go ahead and re-drag this onto here. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to shift over to Maya software for a minute. You can see that diffuse, or the color map itself, by having it embedded on it, it really does sort of accentuate any of the normals just by being there. So if we go back far enough and we bring back our bump map here, reline this up. It adds like to the overall appeal. Looks like Maya's acting a bit wonky since I've messed with it here. Let me throw a light in here. Alright, let's see what that does for us. I'm going to go ahead and pause it and just apply another material. It looks like it's kind of flipping out on what I did. Alright, that's much better. And it also doesn't seem to care much for me using a PSD. I thought with the newer version they fixed that. Okay, so I'm going to show you a couple quick tricks to, again, really push this. So one of the things I do is I'm going to select my brush here, and I create a layer above it, and I call it highlights. And then I create another layer above that, and I call that shadows. Now, shadows are where I'm going to eat away at a lot of any area that's going to produce a shadow. So let's start with our highlight layer first. What I do is the layer is set to 100% here, and I just set my brush by pressing 1 to 10%, and I switch over to a white, and I just throw a line over anywhere where I see there's a little bit of a highlight. So areas like this. So again, I'm just really just pushing, the already highlights that are already there. So I'll look around my model and say, okay, well, across the edge of this garbage can here, that seems to be a nice little highlight. So I'm going to click here, hold shift, and just draw a highlight around that edge. Same thing across this edge here, there's a highlight. Alright, I'm going to do a filter, blur, and just do a Gaussian blur. And just soften up that highlight a little bit more. Now let's save this as a targa. And again, let's just apply this to our model and see how it looks. Alright, that's looking a lot better. And again, you could see how even that's just throwing in that highlight there added a lot to it. Okay, let's take a look at how to tweak or add rust to our scene. So I'm going to pause the video and I'm just going to find a rust texture and drag it into Photoshop. Alright, so just below my layer here, I'm going to create a layer just below that. And then through Photoshop here, what I'm going to do is just drag in this rust image. There we go. And you can't, I was dragging it in, but you couldn't really see it because of this guy right here. So what I'll do is, I'll drop my rust around any of the areas where I think I might need it. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop this underneath the paint layer. So let's go ahead and name this paint. And I know I'm going over 10 minutes here, but I just kind of want to show you this one trick. So I'm going to hit B for brush. And on my paint layer, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a drop shadow. Now it's not going to really do anything. You're not going to notice anything until the next step. And then I just add a layer mask. Now on this layer mask, for those of you who aren't familiar with those, anything painted in black will be completely transparent. So you can see here I'm hitting 0 and it's painting that away. So what I'm going to do is, anywhere on my my image, from my reference, and let's go ahead and get rid of extras so we can we don't have to see that grid. I'm going to start with about 50% by hitting 5 and just really carving away at some of these areas in here where I know in my reference there was a bit of rust. And then in the middle I'll just continue to carve away until it's completely transparent. Same thing down here. This whole bottom part was a bit rusted on my model, and it looks like I didn't grab the right normal map. Because in the other one we actually went in and carved away that rust, but that's okay. We can still simulate it with this and then paint over it in the highlight. You can see here I'm again just carving in this rust, and using that drop shadow, it really gives it some elevation. Alright, so let me zoom out a little bit so you can see that. You can see we get some really nice weathered appearance. So let's go ahead and do the highlights here. Hit B for brush. Same thing as before. I'm going to put my brush at 10%. And at the highest points, so you can imagine these as mountains. So I'm just going to, you just lightly paint into those bottom areas, and then at the higher points, anywhere where it eats away higher, you're going to paint a little bit more. And then I'm going to do a filter, just blur it really quick with a Gaussian blur. Maybe paint a little bit more up here. Alright, let's save that off so you can see what that looks like. Alright, you can see that added a lot to it. I'm going to show you two last things, or we'll do that in the next video. I'm going to show you how to create the actual signage that goes on the front and how to tweak this texture a little bit more.